Hello, and welcome everybody to the, what is this now, 4th annual Friendsgiving Podcast Spectacular. This is our annual tradition where we get to be thankful for the friends we have in podcasting, and we do a round table with American history podcasters. I myself am Kenny Ryan Austin. I'm the host of both Abridged Presidential Histories, which goes through all the American presidents in order in 50 minutes or less and has historian interviews. And I'm also the host of a new podcast called Democracide, which I co-host with my sister. My sister knows nothing about history but loves true crime. I asked her if she wanted to do a true crime podcast, and she said, of course, but what? And I said, well, you know, John Adams once said, there's never been a democracy yet that didn't die by suicide. To which I ask, or was it murder? So that is Democracide. We look at democracies from history that have died, and we asked who killed them and how. Howard, would you please tell us about your podcast?
So I'm Howard Dory. I co-host a podcast called Plotting Through the Presidents with my wife, Jess. We dig into lesser-known stories from early American history, presidential stories of the founders and their families usually, to try to find some of the stories that other people don't have the time or inclination to ever cover, and dig into what's weird and fun and insightful about those.
Thank you, Aaron. I just want to say Howard's podcast can vary from hilarious to deeply moving. It is a fantastic podcast, though. It will give you emotions, whatever you're listening to. Alicia, please tell us about your show.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Alicia, and I run Civics and Coffee, a history podcast, now in its 5th year of production, which I'm still stunned by. And the pitch for everybody listening is I dive into American history in the time it takes you to drink a cup of coffee. So I try to keep episodes short and sweet and to the point, and give you the facts that I think are, the key things to know about any event or person. And I also am very lucky that I get to have historians and authors and public historians come on and chat about their work. Those episodes run a little bit longer, but it's been fun, and we're currently in the middle of reconstruction and gearing up for the Gilded Age, so making some headway.
And I want to say Alicia's show is so excellent. I recently interviewed the author of a new book about Victoria Woodhull, and as preparation, I listened to Alicia's episode on Victoria Woodhull to help me think of what questions to ask. So thank you so much for your bite-sized 15-minute in a cup of coffee episodes. Jerry, tell us about your podcast.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Jerry Landry. I'm the host of the Presidencies of the United States podcast, and I do the exact opposite of Alicia. Instead of bite-sized, I do the deep dive into presidential history and beyond just the individual that served as chief executive, because no one person can make a presidency. That's my premise. And so we explore cabinet members, we explore vice presidents, we explore all the events that you may or may not know about to try and get a rich understanding of what this office is, how it's been shaped and reshaped through history. We finished the Madison series this year, and I'm gearing up for the James Monroe presidency. There is so much to discuss for the possibly lesser-known James. And I also do special series on cabinet members, vice presidents. I have interviews. We cover so much of presidential history. And so if you haven't listened to Presidencies yet, I hope you'll give it a try. There are, I think I'm nearing the 300 episode mark. So there's a lot for you to listen to.
Yeah, you will not find a deeper understanding of presidential history anywhere than Jerry's podcast. So if you ever listen to me or Alicia and you're like, I just want a little bit more or maybe a whole lot more, go to Jerry because he's got it for you. So the way we do this Friendsgiving Spectacular is each of us prepared one question for each other podcast host. And we will do a roundtable discussion going through those questions. But to kick it off, Howard had a fantastic question for everybody. And that is that we are right on the eve of America's 250th birthday. What ideas or facts from the Revolution do you think could use more emphasis today? So I open it up to y'all. Who wants to take this one first?
I vote Howard since it was his question.
Howard, hit us.
All right, twist my arm. I think that some of that spirit is still alive today from the Revolution. when I look at the No Kings rallies with American flags waving and people peacefully protesting in the streets, I think that's exactly what the founders wanted to build into the Constitution. And there's not a lot that they could agree on except those things. Now, maybe Hamilton would be criticizing the protesters while wanting to build a 1,000-seat golden ballroom in the president's house, maybe, but I don't think that would be the popular opinion. Speaking of Hamilton, I'm not going to say that we should bring duels back.
We're starting off strong, folks.
Yeah.
But
There
is something to be said about that honor culture, where people were willing to back up their words, with their lives, where your reputation depended on your word, and there were consequences for lying. And that's not to say that there weren't dishonest scoundrels back then, even committing atrocities carried on by people of honor. But to be a leader back then, the appearance of honor was important, and that gave society some kind of common ground to start from, where you could argue about the meaning of things and what to do about them, but there was still generally only one truth. So I think we should bring back duels. Wait, no. I'm not sure what the answer is there. I can't say, we just need accountability, because for some people, accountability is punishing your enemies for saying the truth. So maybe the answer is just finding a way to restore debate, even in Congress, like with independent fact checkers in real time who have tasers.
Howard, I appreciate that take. One of the things it makes me think of is, I think it was the Washington Post for many years had that guy who would give out Pinocchios, for politicians.
Yes.
And at first it was like a really big deal, and people were really afraid of getting those Pinocchios. And then people just stopped caring. And it's like, okay, like, how do we do it? We that was a really good method of kind of public awareness and I know same public shaming, of lies. But it's almost like we live in a post-truth world, which is scary.
Yeah, and I look forward to hearing how to resolve those things from you, Jerry, and Alicia.
Alicia, would you like to go next?
Sure. I think what I would hope moving into America's 250th birthday celebration is that people actually knew what the revolution was and what it was intended for. I think as a country, we sometimes move too much into the celebratory bent, and we don't evaluate critically what any one event or anniversary means. I wish that people understood that these colonists didn't do it alone, that it was very much a international endeavor, that they needed help from other countries, that isolationism wasn't going to be the way that they were going to secure their freedom. I hope that people understand and can appreciate the fact that they were flawed human beings, that in mission and in purpose, yes, they wanted liberty and freedom for themselves while kind of denying the same for enslaved Africans and indigenous Americans. So I think having a true understanding of what it was all about. And I think too, in understanding that during the revolutionary period and kind of creating the Constitution, that even the founders themselves did not think that the Constitution was this static document that was going to be a tome for all time. Thomas Jefferson himself, he said that it needed to be changed out every 19 years. And if I have the quote here, it says, "Every constitution then and every law naturally expires at the end of 19 years. If it be enforced longer, it is an act of force and not of right." And so I wish more folks knew that. And I think we would have a different sense of our politics if more of us Americans really understood the complexity and the nuance of our history. I think we could still appreciate the American Revolution and what it did, but I think having a fuller and deeper understanding would put us on better footing.
Really interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Alicia. Jerry, what's your take?
So I definitely agree with Alicia. This idea that we shouldn't have the Constitution be this untouchable document because, again, we're coming up on 250 years. The Constitution has been in place for over 200 years, and the nation and the world that gave birth to that document is no longer here.
Mm-hmm.
It has changed. Our nation has changed. But I think what we can take from the revolution and from the ideas that gave birth to that document is that we have to be engaged as citizens. That's the only way this works. We are not going to have all the answers. No one of us is going to have all the answers. That's why we have to come together. And we're going to get it wrong sometimes. And we've got to be okay with that. But just saying, and we've also seen in history what happens when you know that there's a problem and you kick it down the road, or you trust that this other person who is making all these promises that they're going to solve everything. If we trust them implicitly, we are going to end up in danger. We have to be engaged. The founders understood that the citizens needed to be aware, they needed to be educated, and they needed to be engaged with this government. Now, who is a citizen has shifted over time. There are more states, and the nation is much larger than it was. And we have means to be able to engage and be informed. But it's up to us as individuals to be engaged and to be an example to others of what we can do, because we can't force anybody to do anything, but our example, being a good citizen, is what can lead us forward, help us to figure out the answers together. Or then we can just turn to Howard's idea and just bring back dueling and, be done with all of it.
There we go.
I really like, Jerry, what you and Alicia have said. Alicia, by the way, I didn't mention that 19-year quote. Great quote. Thanks for pulling that up and surfacing it here.
Yep.
And to build on what Jerry said about engagement, it's really easy to get engaged in government, easier than you probably think. It doesn't just have to be voting. There are local committees, there are county committees, there are state committees that you can reach out if there's a cause you're interested in and say, hey, I have experience, I'm passionate about that. Do you need my service on that committee? I serve on a state adult education advisory council. We help try to make adult education better in Washington. So if it's something that you can do in many ways, and I encourage everybody to do that. My answer to this question, on the eve of America's 250th birthday, what ideas or facts from the revolution do you think you could use more emphasis today? The thought that came to my mind is I sometimes look at the founders, and I wonder if they didn't yet have the vocabulary for everything that they wanted. And let me unpack that. In my career, I've done many different things. I've worn many different hats. I've been a journalist, I've worked in PR, I've worked in marketing, I do product management, I've been a program manager. And I often think of that program management, and I think what the founders really wanted is they didn't want a commander-in-chief, they wanted a program manager-in-chief. Because they didn't want a king, they didn't want somebody with that power, they just didn't have that title yet. What they really wanted was Congress to be all the stakeholders. And they wanted status updates from the president. And they wanted him to just carry out the will of Congress, of his stakeholders. And they just absolutely did not want the other king. They didn't want one person to accumulate too much power. That was their paranoia. And I think if they'd had that, like if we called the president a program manager-in-chief instead of a commander-in-chief, just how different would everything be, even at a subconscious level of how you think about that person and what they're allowed to do and what they're capable of doing. So that's one of the thoughts that comes to my mind is you read what the founders really care about, you read what they want, and you sometimes realize they didn't quite have the vocabulary to frame things maybe the way that they might today. And it would be so interesting if that's what we had and how that would change all our debates and discussions and how the political system works here. All right. Let's jump into our round robin of questions. So I've got the first one up for Howard, And Howard, I'd love to ask you, I teased this earlier, I recently launched a new podcast that I host with my sister. What advice do you have for creating a successful podcast with a co-host?
Oh, wow. Okay. First off, the thing about your sister, no, I'm just kidding. I don't think you need any advice. I think you're doing awesome. Nice. But one of the first lessons that I learned that might be useful to other people out there is that you need to respond to each other verbally. Mm-hmm. Like in the beginning, Jess would say something in reaction to a story that I kind of had scripted, and then I would just sort of move on. Right. Because I was stuck in the keep telling the story mode.
Right, yes.
And I mean, I performed weekly improv shows in college. That was all about building something together, but it's like I forgot all of that in front of the microphone. And I hope that I learned as we kept going to be more flexible, to explore riffs and tangents, because that stuff can always be edited out later. But you never know when it's going to turn into something really fun that connects with people. Great and there advice. Are always going to be people who don't like any banter, especially if it's in a woman's voice. Yeah. That's just how it is out there. And they just want to hear straight narrative storytelling. And there are plenty of podcasts that they can listen to if they want that. Yeah. But the joy of having co-hosts is that there's human interaction and reaction. So just embrace that. Figure out your unique strengths and roles with each other. Lean into those. Communicate behind the scenes, too, about expectations, about schedule, and just have fun with it.
Thank you very much, Howard. Great advice.
All right. So I have a question for Alicia. If you could co-produce a podcast series with one museum or historical archive or even a brand or a company, what would it be? And what would you want to explore with it?
Yeah, that was a good question. And you sent me on quite the deep dive, the rabbit hole of like, oh, I could do this. Oh, I could do this. Oh, I could do this. So I landed on two. I apologize. They were both kind of right there in line for me. The fun one, I will say first, in my opinion, would be the Walt Disney Museum. It's right in my backyard in Golden Gate Park. And I would love to do a series on the Haunted Mansion because 2026 marks the 55th anniversary of its opening. I think it opened in 1971. And so I think it would be really fun to just talk to the Imagineers and figure out how did this ride come to be in operation and what was the inspiration behind it. It's also one of my favorite rides when I go to Disneyland, so a little selfish on my part, but also talk about like what's the cultural legacy of the Haunted Mansion, right? We've had films now based on it and it gets the holiday overlay every year, so just would really love to do that. I think it would be really fun. So anybody who listens who's from the Walt Disney Museum, give a girl a call. But the other one, the one that I think is probably a little bit, quote unquote, more serious, more academic, would be the Women's Museum of California. I would love to do a deep dive into women's role in the evolution of California's social safety net. It's what I did for my thesis when I was in graduate school. It's something that I hope to turn into a larger project someday. And so I think this would just be a great partnership and talk to maybe some of the big names in the field, talk about their experiences doing this type of work. Start with before the state was even a state and when women were doing private charity work. And I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn that from the jump, even before the Great Depression, California had a lot of charity, indigent type agencies, and that women were at the forefront of a lot of those. They were, by statute, legally required to be on these committees. And so I think that's a fascinating history that many people probably don't know. And then I think you could pepper it in with like the big names that people might know, like Frances Perkins or Julia Lathrop or Jane Addams, right? So I think there's something to be said about the local and the national and just showing this larger story for women.
Cool. I love that.
Thanks. All right. So my question is for Jerry. You produce a lot of content very consistently, and as we have already joked about in the opening minutes of this Friendsgiving episode, you do the deepest of dives, which requires a lot of research. Again, we are graced by the view of your wonderful books. I just need to know, how do you keep it all organized and stay ahead of the game?
Very carefully. No, it's so what ultimately became Presidency started with a project years back to read a presidential biography in order of each president. We had kind of our criteria were it had to be like a full biography. And as I was reading it, I realized I don't know if I'm going to come back to this book again. And so I need to go ahead and start making notes. And so I came up with an Access database that has presidential history. You know, I can go and reference like, you know, the date that things happened. I can do run a query for certain keywords. I have it organized by presidency. And so that really helped to get me started. But then as I'm continuing to read, you know, and especially thinking of the Seat at the Table series on the cabinet secretaries or the vice presidency series, as I'm reading and I learn something as I'm reading about a future secretary or vice president that I'm going to cover, I go ahead and have an outline file saved. So that way I can go in and just, you know, make some notes, note which book it is. So that way when I get to there, I can come back and I can reference it. I can add to that. It is a lot. It is a lot. And in terms of trying to keep up with the episodes, I'm an Excel guy. Everybody knows in my day-to-day world, I love Excel. And so I have a spreadsheet that has when I'm planning on recording, when I'm planning on editing, when I'm planning on releasing, some key facts about each episode, length, all of that. Yes, I'm a little I'm a data guy. I can't help it. But it is the way that I'm able to keep everything together and make sure that I know what to reference when I get to that point.
Yeah, you said run a query, and I damn near ran for the hills. So
pretty much everybody is like, we love that you love that.
That's good for
We're
you.
glad somebody's doing it.
Yeah, it never occurred to me to like VLOOKUP the president. That's
Right.
Well, now they have X lookup, so it doesn't have to be V or H lookup.
Oh, I just fell asleep.
Yeah. You just lost her.
I'm in awe.
That will be my new podcast. The Excel spreadsheets of the United States.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much for that question, Alicia. And Kenny, speaking of new podcast, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Because, as you mentioned, you recently started your new podcast, Democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was wondering, Kenny, what lessons did you learn from launching Abridged Presidential Histories that helped to make this podcast launch smoother? And what would you do different if you had a chance to launch Abridged Presidential Histories again?
Thanks for the question. So I launched Abridged Presidential History 5 years ago, and so much has changed. I mean, in my life, I'm now married. I have a child. I have many more commitments going on in my life. So there aren't a ton of lessons to carry over, especially since I now have a co-host. It feels like it's more lessons to learn, which is why I came here just to ask Howard Dorr how he does it. Like how do you schedule two people with busy lives? How do you promote when social media sucks? Like I grew APH using Twitter, to grow that. I would find people, the similar podcast, and I would follow the followers, and then they would follow me back, and then they listen to my podcast, and that led to a lot of growth. But social media does not work the same way it used to. Like, that's not a practical strategy anymore. So it's more been trying to figure out new tricks. But if I were to start Abridged Presidential History over again, with today's tools and tricks at my fingertips, I would save so much time by just using AI to design my logo. That's what I did for Democracy. That was much faster, working with my sister to do that. For Abridged Presidential Histories, I was using various, Photoshop tools, trying to make something cool. So that was very much there. And I also would have done historian interviews from the get-go. As I was doing Abridged Presidential Histories, I think it was about a year into it when that started coming together. And one of my most frequent questions I get is, hey, you're going to do some historian interviews? I'm like, those early presidents, George Washington, Madison, Jefferson, Adams, and that would be something that would start from the get-go. So, yeah, thanks. Good question. All right, let's see what I've got. I've got a question for Alicia. Alicia, I really enjoyed your recent interview with William Taubman, author of McNamara at War, which is totally on my holiday wish list from my family. And it got me thinking, McNamara is a guy he was the Secretary of Defense under JFK and LBJ during Vietnam. And he's a guy who I often find myself struggling to figure out what to make of him. I keep reading something new that is like, oh, wait, but what about this? But what about that? There's so much that comes out. He's a complex guy. So a question for you, is there anyone in history who your opinion made an unexpected 180 turn on as you learn more about them? And who was that and why?
So first, the book is great, and you'll have a completely new and different interpretation of Bob McNamara. So definitely pick it up, and I hope you get it for your holidays. Yes. I know. So this one I was struggling because I going to history high school class, right? They don't do a lot of deep dives into people, right? You get presidents. And so I remember learning about Ulysses S. Grant, and the things that we learned about him was that he was a general in the Civil War, that he was president after Johnson during Reconstruction, and that his presidency was littered with corruption. Mm-hmm. And then you translate that to going into undergraduate and even graduate school, they don't spend a lot of time on the presidents, right? That's not how college courses are built. So unless I did my own kind of deep dive, that was kind of the working knowledge that I had. And I, like Jerry, did read a biography about Grant, but I, in hindsight, think that perhaps it wasn't as good of a biography as maybe I could have picked. But that might have been just the product of the time, too. I did this a very long time ago, and my knowledge about presidential biographies and biography authors was yay small. So I have to go with Grant, because I have to give the credit to Ron Chernow and also Fergus Bordewich, who wrote The Klan War, which I know I saw. It's in Jerry's background. Ron Chernow, obviously, there's not a single thing that you're not going to learn about the subject, right? He does very, very deep dives. I felt like I basically knew what Grant ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, what his favorite colors were, right? But you get a different perspective of Grant. Again, he was not a perfect man. No person is, no president is, but that he was so much more than presidential corruption. And I think his accomplishments and what he was able to do during Reconstruction is so undervalued and understudied and under-celebrated, in my opinion. And especially when you compare him to his predecessor and his successor, right? Johnson, a racist who really wanted to have white supremacy. Rutherford B. Hayes could not care less, right? Mm-hmm. And, you think the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act, what he did in the Colfax Massacre, what he did with the Memphis Massacre, the fact that he worked so hard to try to protect the vote for Black men, I think is something that we need to know more about. But I also think, unfortunately, that Grant suffers from a larger issue, which is, at least when I was in high school, I don't know that it's changed. Hopefully it has. There wasn't a lot of emphasis about Reconstruction. What I learned about Reconstruction when I was in high school was that there was a passage of a series of amendments and it failed. Yeah. That's it. That's all I heard. So you didn't get a chance to go into the complex and the nuance part of this story. So my answer would be Grant, only because I think, more people need to know who he was, what he did, and that he was more than just a general and a president of a corrupt administration.
That's a great answer. Grant, same thing for me, like absolute 180 once you start reading into them. And I'll plug something for the future. A future season of Democracide will be how did Southern democracy die for black voters? Ooh. So it'll look at Reconstruction. So that'll be sometime down the road. Don't know when we'll get to it, but that is definitely something I want to dive into in that podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Okay, so my next question is for Howard. Welcome to the graduate school life. You recently started a master's program. Whoop, whoop. Yes. I really just want to know, how's it going? And what do you hope to gain from your experience?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. So I'm going for a master's in history at the University of Massachusetts Boston's online MA program. I'm really enjoying it so far. It's a ton of reading. I feel my eyeglasses prescription increasing every day. But I'm doing it because I love history. I want to do it professionally. I want to write more. I want to hone my research skills. And I think going through this rigorous program and developing those skills can be a springboard to more professional opportunities and just get me going faster because I'm plodding through the presidents. I'm moving slowly. I need to move a little more quickly. Having to write like 3 20-page papers in a semester maybe will help with that. We'll see. One of the courses I'm taking this semester actually is on the history of fascism, which is, it's really interesting to look at that. It's focused on the different fascist movements of the 20th century and what they have in common and what their differences are. I'm finding out that people have been accusing their opponents of being fascists since the 1930s. That's just been something that people have done to the point where the word basically had no meaning. So that's nothing new. But as to the question, is what's happening here in the United States, is this fascism? Thank you for asking, Alicia. I think that was your question. I'm still no expert, but here's a little bit of what I think. I think that compared to nations like Germany and Italy, real fascist countries, no, we are not a fascist nation. But you could make the argument that aspects of fascism that go back to those times are part of the authoritarian nationalist administration right now. Like a charismatic leader with no real ideology except an aggrieved, vengeful focus on a racial foreign threat poisoning his nation's blood, a focus on the enemy within, really a mission to bring the country back to its pure roots before they ruined it, a glorification of violence, the militarization of the police, what you might even call secret police, plus efforts to control and stifle the media and control education to make it more patriotic. A concern that women aren't having enough babies, and the invocation of emergency powers to grab power. So people using the term fascism today shouldn't necessarily be dismissed as alarmist because there are parallels that I think we should be talking about more. And honestly, in relation to real history and not just feelings. But the program's going well. Thank you for asking.
Also, you're going to need to share your reading list for that class. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. I have a question for Jerry. Now, you've dived deep into the first 4 presidents. And I'm wondering, what is the most confounding thing for you that each of them has done? Something where you just still cannot understand what the hell were they thinking?
And it's funny, whenever I saw that question, I was like, ooh, I'm going to need to think about that. And then I realized, no, I really don't have to think too hard about that because I do have an answer for each one. So with George Washington, with his presidency, he was so deliberate for so much of his presidency, what he did, what he didn't do. He realized the importance of setting precedents. But then you have the situation with Edmund Randolph, who was his first Attorney General and his second Secretary of State. Randolph, he had known for decades. He was a fellow Virginian, and he was somebody who was leaning towards the Democratic Republicans, but wasn't all the way there. He was somebody that Washington really could relate to. He was somebody who could kind of see both sides. And one of the things that Washington did so well with his original cabinet was to bring people together who would give him different perspectives. And as time went on, he started, the Federalists, if you call it a party, I think it's more of a faction than a party per se, but the people who call themselves Federalists, increasingly, he got more of those people into his cabinet. He got second and third tier folks because most folks, whenever Washington asked, do you want to be on the cabinet? They were like, no, I do, just count me out of that one. So Randolph still helped to provide some perspective, and he was somebody that Washington could understand, and that could understand Washington. And then he allowed Timothy Pickering and some of the other Federalists who didn't like Randolph because he was not like them. They managed to poison Washington's mind against him and forced Randolph out of the cabinet. And to me, that was a big mistake for Washington. I think he lost some really good perspective, and you see increasingly at the end of his presidency and then in his post-presidency, he goes more into the Federalist and the ultra-Federalist camp. And that's not what George Washington wanted. That if he would have had a longer post-presidency, I think it may have hindered his reputation. He died when folks still had this great opinion of Washington. But that's the point, that it was just like, why did you listen to Pickering? Pickering is also the reason that, I come to John Adams and I say, what the hell were you thinking in keeping Pickering and these other Federalists in his cabinet whenever he took over from Washington? He knew these folks. He knew what kind of folks they were, and yet and granted, there was no precedent for this. There wasn't this idea that, of course, cabinet members change when a new president comes in, but him keeping them in his cabinet cost him so much time and headache. And if he would have actually gotten some folks like John Marshall that eventually came into the cabinet that he could work with, I think that John Adams would have had a much stronger presidency and possibly could have had a second term. Sticking with this theme of transitions, Thomas Jefferson, in his last year as president, when he basically just threw his hands up and said, you know what, I'm on my way out anyway. We just passed the Embargo Act. Everything's good. I'm not going to do anything for the next, 9 months or so. It's like, what were you thinking, Jefferson? Especially if you want James Madison, your chosen successor, to come into office and actually be able to do something. He created so much chaos and problems for Madison going into his presidency, and it took him so long to recover from that. If Jefferson actually would have done the job for a bit longer, he may have been able to help Madison. And then the Embargo Act, we're just not even, it's like, what really were you thinking with that?
Yeah, that really was Jefferson's, let the Rams kill the boys on the White House lawn, period.
Exactly. He's like, whatever, just whatever. I've got my books here, I've got my wine, my books, I'm fine.
What else does a man need?
Yeah.
His mockingbird.
His mockingbird. And then last but certainly not least, James Madison. Oh, James Madison had so many issues in really both of his terms, but at least things were starting to settle out in the second term. But one of the things that just continues to confound me, Madison had this habit of sending in people's names for nomination for cabinet positions, for the Supreme Court, without actually asking them, do you actually want me to nominate you?
Oh, my God.
And so then the Senate would confirm them. And then the person would actually learn, oh, I'm the new Secretary of State. No, I don't want to be Secretary of State. Thank you. And it's like, and it just kept on happening. It's like, at some point, get the hint. There's an order for these things. First, make sure that the person is actually going to accept. Then send in their nomination. And oh, by the way, if the Senate isn't in session, you can always appoint them and send in the nomination later. But let's just make sure that they're actually interested first. Come on, friend. You created more problems for yourself than you had to.
That's a good one.
But yes, they all had those what were you thinking moments for me.
Nice.
Well, thank you so much for that question, Howard. It was a fun exercise. And like I said, it didn't take me long to come up with those. But it was fun to kind of go back through and think, like, where were the times that I was just like, what's going on here? So, going a little further into history with my question for Alicia. So, Alicia, you're progressing, like you said, through the Reconstruction, and you're about to get to the Gilded Age in your podcast. And I just wanted to see what has been the most surprising thing that you've learned thus far in your research, and what's been one key takeaway from your study of this period of American history to date, a period that I'm going to get to maybe like in 20 years' time.
And that's okay. You take your time, Jerry. We all appreciate it. I leave it to Jerry to ask one of the most philosophical type of questions, like this one surprising moment. So I would say the one thing that I love about the podcast is I also take requests from listeners, and I have some of the greatest, most inquisitive listeners around, and they put in some really great topics, present company included. So I've gotten a chance to really discover things that I just would never otherwise think to look into or even have any awareness of. Things that come to mind is the history of the World's Fairs. That was one of the first requests that I got. And so I asked the person, I'm like, is it just one World's Fair? Do you want like the whole thing? And they're like, as much as you can give me. And little did I know that that would turn into 3 separate episodes. So I could cover all of them. And just the ones in the United States too. So that was quite fun. And learning just that the World's Fair was not only a big kind of affair to show off each other's countries, but also some great inventions were displayed there, right? The elevator, I think, obviously the telephone was demonstrated at one of the World's Fairs. So I think that is a fun thing. I also learned about Anna Kingsley, thanks to Jerry. That was a Jerry request. So I think my listeners keep me fresh. My listeners keep me honest. So listeners, keep the requests coming because I always learn something new and surprising by your requests. In terms of my takeaway, I think, there is something to the old adage that history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. I think we see over and over and over again throughout history that isolation and division is really not the way to progress. And it's not the way to accomplish a common goal, but it is the one thing that bad actors rely on consistently in their efforts to achieve and maintain power. I think we students of history know that though the arc towards justice might seem like a line sometimes, and this huge arc, it feels like it's on a zigzag, that we know that when we work collaboratively and we use each other's strengths and we lift each other up instead of tear each other down, that we can do amazing things. The power of the people will always be better and greater and stronger than the power of those for the power of those people that are in power. And so I think that's something that is one of my big takeaways as I've progressed through the various stages of American history, and hopefully that's been communicated in my episodes.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so my question now is for Kenny. So I know you're working on Democracide, and you've reached the modern era of your main show, but Have you ever had any desire to maybe go back through and cover a president again? Say, I don't know, interview some historians about the early presidents, or maybe do something, because I like to give people extra work, do a little abridged vice president series.
Sure, good question. I have not thought of going back and doing like old presidents again, but I have definitely thought of doing historian interviews, and it's something I am kind of keeping an eye out for. You know, like the recent interview with the author of the book about Victoria Woodhull, first woman to run for president. You know, it's like as new books come out, keeping an eye out for opportunities to interview the historians, or might just, you know, occasionally on a lark reach out to a historian who looks great and I want to talk about Washington with him or something like that, or her. So there is a little bit of that thought. Before I decided to do Democratize my next project, though, I did really think that my next project was going to be the abridged Supreme Court history or some kind of Supreme Court history. I would frankly love to do just like a special season on all the worst decisions the Supreme Court has ever made, because there are so many, and there are so many questions about the Supreme Court. It's like, why do they have their power? Do they still deserve it? Who else could have it? You know, for a group of people who say that we're going to decide what's constitutional by looking at the Constitution, there's nothing in the Constitution that says they get to do that. You know, it just kind of came out as a freak accident because the Constitution didn't say anybody could do that, and everyone started fighting for that power, and it kind of fell into their lap. When it seemed like they were making good decisions, they would earn that credibility, and people increasingly look to them. But, I mean, you can look at everything from the Dred Scott case to Plessy versus Ferguson, Citizens United, the recent decision that presidents just can't break the law while they're presidents. You know, like, there have been a lot of decisions that you look at, and any objective person would just be like, what? You know, like, are you really applying a legal and scholarly and like, or are you just coming at this from a political angle? Is this not real? And why, like, did the founders ever want these unelected, unaccountable, lifetime people to be able to determine what the law is for folks around the country? So that is one that I've always wanted to whether do a podcast on or write a book on or just talk more about, because, yeah, the history of the Supreme Court, and especially just like the history of the worst Supreme Court decisions ever, especially, would be really interesting to me. So that is the answer to that question. That was a fun question. So thanks for throwing that my way.
I feel like if you write a book about the worst Supreme Court decisions, you might have an audience. I'm just saying.
Absolutely. I actually pitched somebody once on I think we have like had 110 or 111 justices in history. And when the 112th is nominated, I want to write a book, 112 Angry Men, which is, you know, and just that would be the Supreme Court history that I want to write. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what the future holds. Thank you for that great question. I have a question for Jerry. Now, I don't know if all of you guys have seen this, and Alicia, you know, we're recording this in late October, and there's a new Netflix miniseries out next week about the assassination of President James Garfield by the madman Charles Guiteau. And I can't wait to watch it. Like, I am stoked for that. It looks great. So my question to you, Jerry, is if you could make a miniseries about any obscure time from presidential history, because that is an obscure time. Like, I was like, they're making that into a miniseries? Amazing. But how did that get, like, what? That's amazing. But what would you do? What would your obscure story turned into a miniseries be, and why?
So first of all, Kenny, I am excited about that as well. I think they announced that they were doing this like a year or so ago, and I was like, oh, yes. And then I saw, coming out in fall 2025. I was like, that's a long way away.
Yeah, that's a long way.
Like, come on. I want it now. So I'm glad we're almost there. I can't wait to see it. So I don't think it's going to come as too much of a surprise to Presidency's listeners that I would want one on William Henry Harrison.
Of course.
And I think that you could come up with a really great miniseries about the election of 1840 and his short presidency. I think you've got some great characters to work with. I mean, this is a time you've got Henry Clay, you've got John C. Calhoun, you've got Daniel Webster.
Yeah.
Andrew Jackson's still kicking, somehow fueled by hatred and vitriol. And then you got this guy who knew Washington, who got his start with an army commission from George Washington, who's known many of the main players in the early republic for decades. And his story is just so fascinating. I think it would be an amazing miniseries. And, I'm working on my Harrison biography. Hopefully I will get to it before I get to the Harrison presidency on presidencies. But we'll see what happens. But to me, it's always such a fascinating story, and I think it could be made into a great miniseries. But another one that came to mind, not quite as obscure, but please, somebody needs to make this. Aaron Burr. I mean, it may not even be a mini series. Like, you could make like a few seasons of Aaron Burr. And again, just so fascinating. There's so much to talk about and so many different ways that you can do it. So many different figures. Yeah. I mean, there are, and that's part of, and I imagine for y'all as well, these hidden gems in history that folks don't know as much about, and you get to share them with folks. It's amazing. So I say William Henry Harrison and Aaron Burr, let's go ahead and make a deal.
I feel like the Harrison one for his presidency, like you could do that almost in real time, like 24 or The Pit.
Yeah.
Just follow the whole thing every hour.
There we go. And there was a lot that happened in those 30 days. So.
And Burr, I mean, that's a way to marry like John Adams and like Red Shoe Diaries on a premium channel. Like you could really, that's a four square every audience.
There will be something for everybody.
Yes.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much for that question. And Howard, speaking of obscure figures from presidential history,
Ooh.
So I had to ask, when are we going to start our William Wirt Appreciation Society? And are there any other historical figures besides Wirt and, of course, the Adamses that you've come across recently that have piqued your interest for further study?
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. I mean, that was a wild ride with Wirt, wasn't it? Like, I for some background, I got to be a guest on Jerry's show where we talked a lot about William Wirt. He was an attorney general and lots of other stuff. I was thinking, surely, Jerry's going to cut a ton of my inane ranting and spare the audience from having to experience that. But then you turned it into 3 episodes. You are not the ruthless editor with myself as I am. I mean, it reminds me of a quote about a film editor. It was there was nothing on the cutting room floor except the editor's feet. But I mean, you still made tight episodes, but I think I would have, maybe for your patrons, you can do a Howard free version. No, you did a great job with it. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, so there have been a few lesser known figures that I've come across recently, very different random figures, like Elder John Leland was this Presbyterian preacher in the late 1700s, early 1800s. He's the man behind the mammoth cheese that was given to Thomas Jefferson. He was fascinating, super popular at the time, strongly believed in the separation of church and state. He once had a demon in his walls at home. It went away after a while.
He's someone I could occasionally.
It sounds like it might have been a big insect. I'm not exactly sure. He's somebody I could study more because just a fascinating figure. And I love leaning into presidential myths and the origins of them. And sometimes I come across weird characters from that. Like I was digging into the story of Theodore Roosevelt in the Amazon. There's a story that he witnessed a school of piranhas skeletonizing a cow. But really, the story also says really it was a setup. And that a bunch of piranhas were caught and kept in this shallow area and starved. And the cow was thrown in there so that Roosevelt would witness something that didn't normally happen in nature. That whole story, the skeletonizing, the setup, was all made up by this tropical fishmonger, publishing magnate, ornithologist guy, Herbert R. Axelrod, who, there are about 20 fish species named after this guy. He started a tropical fish hobbyist magazine. Most of the books in pet stores about any pets that you would have read through the 60s, 70s, 80s were written or ghostwritten by this guy. And 70% of him is like legit amazing expert, but 30% is like corrupt con artist. And it was just fascinating reading about how he said he wrestled an anaconda, and other people were like, that never happened. He spent some time in jail for tax fraud. There's a story that he landed at some airport in South America and walked outside and went up to like this big puddle basically and put a net in and came out with this fish that no one had ever seen before. I don't know if it's true. It may not be, but it's part of the lore behind Herbert R. Axelrod, this guy who just made up what's become an accepted presidential fact. So figures like him are fun to run into. And one more I want to throw out there. There are lots of people who have bad historical reputations that just stuck until someone comes along to really challenge that. One of those people was Eliza Monroe Hay. She was James Monroe's daughter, and she was sort of the acting first lady because her mother was often too ill to fulfill like the hostess duties that were expected. She got this reputation for being super bossy and gossipy and explosive. And there's a story that she abandoned her family to go off in France and live there. And she was actually buried at Père Lachaise cemetery there. And I recently got to talk to a woman, Barbara Vorndick, an author who researched Eliza more than anybody else ever has and determined that she was treated really unfairly. Like, this is a woman who had her inheritance basically stolen from her by her family. Her parents, her husband, and her only daughter all died within a short period of each other. She went off to France for her health, basically. And when she died, she was destitute. She was begging for a place to live. An American ambassador there who happened to have known her father noticed that she died and paid for an unmarked grave. And Barbara Vorndick found all this out, found her unmarked grave there in the cemetery, and led a massive effort to bring Eliza's remains back to Richmond, Virginia, to the Monroe family plot. And she was finally reinterred at a ceremony 2 days before today, like just a few days ago, as we're recording this. And if it weren't for the work of her, I wouldn't know that there was more to this story of this woman who so many biographers have just written off as being this snooty brat. So I love finding out things like that and digging into people and their reputations and finding people who have done that and changed how you think about people.
So if I ever get a bad reputation, I'm just going to hope someone like you in the future saves me. You know?
I think Jerry will probably dig into everything. And the whole truth will come out.
I don't want Jerry's level of scrutiny.
It's funny. I'm actually reading the Eliza Hay biography now because, so for presidencies, I always try and do an episode on the First Lady or whoever was acting as First Lady. And this one's a challenging one. Alicia, I know we talked about Elizabeth Monroe back in the day. There's just not much on her. And so I was like, well, they've got two daughters who also helped with hosting duties. And then as I was starting to think about it, I found the biography and I was like, oh, perfect. This is actually when publication is working out for me. It's not like a year after I do the episode and then somebody comes out with a great biography.
So, Kenny, my next question is for you.
All right.
So they say, and I don't know who they is, but they say that if Hamlet and Othello switch places, if they were put into each other's plays, there would be no tragedy. Because Othello was all about taking action without thinking, and Hamlet was just paralyzed by what should I do? In that spirit, let's say that you could switch two presidents out with each other, where they take over for each other at specific moments in time. Who would you switch out, and why?
Fun question. I think the The answer here is I would trade 22nd President Grover Cleveland with 24th President Grover Cleveland because that's what I would do is I would swap out 39th President Jimmy Carter with 45th President Donald Trump. So first Trump term. And the reason is like Carter's term, his 4 years in office, were just the most snake bit 4 years in office I think any president has ever had, designed to kill any president's career and legacy. You had stagflation, you had an Iranian revolution, you had an oil crisis, you had a Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, you had the hostage crisis in Iran. You know,
the swamp rabbit.
The swamp rabbit. They came for him in the swamp. I was just telling my dad about that story the other day. Great story. And you know, I just feel like that would have tanked this toxic MAGA movement and the toxicity that it has brought to American politics. It would have discredited it if it had happened then. And then look on the other side, like Trump's term, first term, not too much happened except COVID was the big thing. You know, it was a pretty easy ride until COVID. And COVID is actually like the challenge that I think Carter's engineering mind would have been perfect to address. You know, he would have asked tough questions. He would have followed science. He would have been really analytical about, like, that is the exact kind of thing Carter's mind would have been perfect for, as opposed to these other challenges that he faced, that there were either no solutions or he just wasn't equipped for them. So I think those would be the two I would switch. But fun question, Howard. Thank you.
Nice.
Thanks. So that concludes our questioning. I believe all of us have asked the question of everybody else, and we're here at the end of 60 minutes. Great time for a conversation. So I do want to thank y'all for joining me. It's always good to see y'all. And I want to remind our listeners, you can find all of our podcasts. You can find Jerry Landry, Presidencies of the United States. You can find Alicia, oh my God, brain fart. Coffee podcast.
Civics and coffee.
Civics and coffee. I'm a little sick, if you can tell from my voice, and I'm going to take a nap after this. So I so apologize. Civics and coffee. Howard Dory, Plotting Through the Presidencies. And you can find my podcasts, Abridged Presidential Histories and Democracide, on all the major platforms. And I believe, who was it that was planning on putting this up on YouTube somewhere? Somebody, was that Howard? Had you asked for that?
Oh, I thought possibly we could all share it with our patrons or supporters or something like that.
Okay,
like,
great.
If they want to see our faces, they got to pay.
You might see this on YouTube. You can judge us by the books on our bookshelves or the art on the walls behind us. I did put on a shirt and did my hair for this, so please do, so I could feel like it was worth it. But yeah, thank y'all. It's great to see you. Happy holidays. I wish you all a happy holiday season. Can't wait to do this again next year. Take care. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Abridged Presidential Histories. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, tell your friends and family about the show, and write a 5-star review on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you'd like to support the show, you can look it up on Patreon or go directly to www.patreon.com/abridgedpresidentialhistories. This helps me buy books and pay to host the show, and thank you so much to everyone who has contributed so far. The music of today's podcast was a public domain recording of the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. Thanks for tuning in, and see you down the trail on Abridged Presidential Histories.